I'm Vicki Hogarth, and welcome to Southwest Magazine. My guest today is on committees investigating both the ArriveCAN app as well as the firing of two scientists from the National Laboratory in Winnipeg back in 2019. Please welcome MP for New Brunswick Southwest, John Williamson. Thank you, John, so much for being here today.
It's good to see you and all your viewers once again.
Now, I know that you are working on two very high-profile things right now, the ArriveCAN app investigation, as well as the investigation into the firing of two scientists from the National Lab. But before that, the passing of our Prime Minister Brian Mulroney. Can you tell us a little bit about how you're feeling about this? Is just while we're recording this, it just happened on Friday, and this is Sunday.
That's right. And in fact, I was supposed to be in the House of Commons on that Friday, and it is tradition that whenever a former Prime Minister passes away, Parliament closes for the day. So that was a somber day. I think we all, we all realize our own mortality when a leader passes away. And it was 40 years ago this year that Brian Mulroney won a large majority and governed for almost 10 years. And one of the elections that got me so interested in politics was actually the 1988 free trade election. I was a student then, studying at McGill in Montreal, and we had the great free trade debate. And as a young person, the arguments that Brian Mulroney made about Canada being able to compete on its own with anyone, anywhere in the world, and do so on a level playing field, that we could, we didn't need to think of ourselves as second tier to the Americans or everyone, that captivated me, and I think it's one of the reasons why I became a lifelong conservative at that point. I met Mr. Mulroney a few years after that as a student, and had the occasion to meet him several times over the last 40 years. And while he was in some ways sometimes a controversial Prime Minister, I think he made a lot of decisions that have withstood the test of time. Take free trade. We're pretty much all free traders now. The Liberals acknowledge that he was right and they were wrong. And of course, this country has done well by pursuing trade agreements with other countries around the world. And even the hated GST, HST, I know it's a tax everyone doesn't like to pay, including myself, but you've had numerous governments that could have repealed it. But that tax replaced a manufacturing tax that was hidden. It hurt our competitiveness around the world. We have a visible tax now, so if we raise it, people really get upset about it, and of course we've seen it come down generally, not go up. But again, it's another one of his accomplishments. And so I think he changed the orientation of the country, and a lot of his policies have withstood the test of time. So I think he's going to be remembered as one of the great prime ministers of the country because of the decisions he took. He was the first conservative prime minister since Sir John Macdonald to win back-to-back majorities, and even compared to other prime ministers in the previous decades, it was rare to win majority governments like that. So I know Mr. Mulroney had a lot of moxie, and sometimes that irritated some Canadians. But I don't think there's any doubt that he governed, I think, in a way that he thought was best for the country, and I think he did so in a way that improved Canada. And we look back now, and I think he was a leader that I think put Canada's interests first, but also worked with our allies around the world. And it also took a brave step by, for example, championing the cause of Nelson Mandela in opposition to apartheid. When some of our allies were not prepared to go that far, he really took a step in that direction. It's one reason why Mr. Mandela came to this country soon after he was released to thank Canada, and that was Mr. Mulroney's leadership. So, and for, we're hearing other accolades, his signing of the acid rain protocol, which has cleaned up lakes across this country. So, there was a lot there, and I think we're going to miss leaders like Mr. Mulroney.
I'm sure there's definitely so much reflection going on in Ottawa. For me, he's the Prime Minister of my youth, yes. So there's something special about that. The first person you really see in that role. So I really feel like my generation, your generation, we grew up with him.
Yeah.
So definitely a huge loss
Yeah.
for our country.
That's true. All his bluster and his also his vision as well. I think you're right. Look, like any politician, there's going to be pluses and minuses, but I think on balance, he's going to go down in the history book as a real transformative prime minister for this country, and one I think who left the country better off than when he found it.
And I mean, the nice thing about the tributes is it reminds you of what a person has given to a country. So I look forward to following those over the next few weeks as well.
That's right. Yes, and he will have a state funeral in the next couple of weeks as well. It's an opportunity to hear about his whole legacy. The good and some of the things that didn't work out as he'd hoped. But no, I think it's a moment where I think we also look back, I think, at a different time of politics as well. And it's hope that leaders not only will they leave the country better off than when they started, but also put the national interest first.
You are dealing with some really interesting parts of Canadian recent history right now. I want to talk first, because I think it's probably the biggest headlines right now in the news, has to do with the firing of the 2 scientists from the National Lab. This happened back in 2019, but I think anyone can do the math and know that the pandemic 2020 was right after that.
Yeah.
And tell us a little bit about the committee you've been on. I know you've talked about it here before, but this is the first time we've had documents released since.
Well, let me talk about the news first, because the news actually is striking. Last week in Parliament, the Government of Canada tabled over 600 pages of documents it had previously classified either on privacy or secrecy grounds. And there was a big kerfuffle really since 2020 in Parliament about releasing those documents, because two Canadian scientists were suddenly in 2019 escorted out of the Winnipeg National Microbiology Lab. This is a level 4 lab that contains some of the world's deadliest viruses that if you catch it, chances are you're going to die. So it's a top secret facility that is classified and access is restricted. And so Parliament is wondering, well, why were 2 of its top scientists let out of the building? And in early 2021, they were fired. And so for some time, parliamentary committees were trying to get to the bottom of what had happened, because the government wasn't saying anything. They just said it was a protocol matter or personnel matter, which it turns out was not the case. This week, we found out that the 2 scientists were fired for collaborating with mainland China, including the People's Liberation Army and elements of China's military that is involved with converting dangerous pathogens into military weapons. So very, very serious. The government tried to paint it as, we didn't know this was happening, but they're responsible. The Prime Minister has a special responsibility for national security in this country. They hid these documents, I think, because of the embarrassment, and not just the embarrassment of what had happened in the lab and how lax security was, but the fact that you had one of the 2 scientists was involved in espionage. The other was an enabler, but it is clear that the relations between this scientist and officials in mainland China, as well as the military, completely unacceptable. We lost secrets to China. The lab was somehow opened up to military officials from that country who had access to some of our secrets, our secrets in the lab. So a real problem in terms of Canada's reputation as being able to run a lab like this, but also it brings the whole question of Chinese interference back into play in this country, where there's an ongoing commission about electoral interference, and now we see that mainland China went to great lengths in order to get into this level 4 lab, the only one that Canada has, and one that right now is under a real cloud.
Wow.
And so my work, since you brought it, so my work over the last year and a half, in order to solve this, the political parties in the House of Commons agreed that a group of 4 members of Parliament would review these documents We could only do that, and I was the conservative member. We had to review the documents in a Government of Canada facility. We had to have security clearance, and we had to sign an oath that we would not reveal the documents. And this went on. The study began last spring. We went through them. We made our recommendations as to which parts should be declassified. Then there was a panel of 3 judges that acted as the arbiter between what we were recommending and the government, because the government had kept pretty much everything classified. And lo and behold, at the end of the day, there were 2 kind of groups of documents. Documents from the health agency, of which I would say probably 97% of that was opened up, cleared, unredacted for the public to see and parliamentarians, and then CSIS documents from the Security and Intelligence Agency, and I would say about 90% of those documents were opened up for Parliament to see. So it tells us a great story, I think a tragic story, an embarrassing story from Canada's perspective about how poorly this lab was run, and the lengths that Chinese agents went to penetrate and steal some of our secrets.
Wow. So what does this do in terms of our relationships with our allies when we know we're this penetrable?
That's a great question. I mean, I thought you were going to ask what does it do with our relationship with China. It probably puts it, again, even further into the deep freeze. I think you just hit on one of the major points, that why the government didn't want to release these documents. There's a concern that our allies, Americans, the Brits, other Europeans, aren't going to want to work with our scientists in Winnipeg now because they can't be trusted. They can't run a facility that's going to protect secrets. Because I mentioned that Chinese nationals, as well as members of the People's Liberation Army, somehow gained access to this lab. This lab is supposed to be open to only Canadians that have a security clearance, with some exceptions. If a near ally with a scientific background from a similar facility that we're working with, provisions can be made to allow them in. But the idea of allowing Chinese nationals that have not been reviewed by security agents, and that's exactly what happened, entered the lab, I think a lot of our allies are going to be wondering what happened at Canada's lab, why, and should they work with us again?
Because it was beyond just there's the espionage element, one of the scientists, and I don't know to what extent, what information was given back to China. So there's that element, as well as also that it was a lax laboratory.
That's right.
Where it seemed that it was quite easy to access, which post-COVID-19, I think we are all looking at things like that. I'm sure before that was terrifying, but post-COVID-19, I think it's changed all of our views of what can happen in a laboratory.
Well, that's very, very true. And so you're right that the facility was not well governed. I think it explains why there were 2 key scientists that left the lab and the health agency just months into the pandemic, which was very odd. But to give you a sense, one of the scientists that was fired provided the entire gene sequence for Ebola to the lab in mainland China, the Wuhan Institute of Virology. So there were secrets and information that was shared that should not have been. As well, we see that one of the scientists is listed on numerous patents in China. This is often a technique that is used when you steal a secret, you then write a report up on it, you patent it, and that becomes ownership of the individuals that have patented it now. So there was theft, and as well that theft has been turned into ownership. Wow. And of course this is scientific knowledge. Once it's gone, it's gone. It's not like we can do anything now to get it back. We just need to have a government that's more serious about protecting our secrets and ensuring that when there's oversight, that's followed through on and not left till after the horses left the barn.
Did it look like that's what they were looking to take, was scientific knowledge? Was that?
I think there's a couple things. I think there was best practices. I think there was knowledge as well, and there was just a troubling relationship between these 2 scientists that were fired, and and the government in China and its officials. And so where does this go next? I think that not only will the scientific community and the securities community have to have a reevaluation of how they operate. I think in Parliament you're going to see investigations coming from the health community to make sure this lab is actually doing its job now. Probably from either the Foreign Affairs Committee or the Canada-China Committee on China's involvement in this lab, and probably an investigation into how and why the government obstructed this information. This took way too long for it to come before Parliament. There's no reason why it should have taken 3 or 4 years. There was a lot of stonewalling. Parliament called for these documents 4 times. The Liberals even went so far as to sue Parliament to delay even further. There was no way a court was going to oppose Parliament's long-standing right to access any documents it wants from the federal government. That's our job to oversee it. There's a lot of stonewalling, and of course now we're years later. The government's saying it's all fixed, but we need to check that and verify it. So I don't think we've heard the end of the story.
And so the time, I know that when Canadians first heard about this, this would be a while back now.
Yeah.
I mean, the
4 years,
obvious time frame hitting around the time of COVID definitely was alarming, but was that just pure coincidence?
Yeah, I think it was a coincidence because they were escorted out of the lab in I think the mid to late 2019, so well before COVID, and that began to raise alarm bells. Like, why were 2 Chinese Canadians who had a long history working there escorted out? Very, very rare from a level 4 lab. So we were talking about that in Parliament before COVID. But what is unusual is that then and we still don't know why, that 2 of the leading scientists that ran the facilities quit within 6 months to a year. The second one was almost a year later, quit in the middle of the pandemic. Very unusual. We think it's because they were tied in with some of the lax security and oversight at the lab, and it made there was a problem the government identified early on. They just weren't upfront about it, and so here we are in 2024 now finding out the truth. I mean, the government first tried to say it was privacy. Well, that's not true. Then they tried to say it was national security. Very little of the documents that I reviewed related directly to materials that were so sensitive they couldn't be released. The vast majority, it was just bloody embarrassing for the government, and in that it showed that security wasn't taken seriously, and we had espionage happening in our top scientific lab in this country.
Has it already informed how we are working in the national lab now, or is that something to come?
Well, we hope so, and I suspect steps have been taken. You would hope so. If it hasn't, oh my God. But that's why I think Parliament's going to begin to bring in people that will answer these questions before committee. When people appear before committee, there is a sense that it's like in a court of law. We don't swear people in, but there is an expectation that people will tell the truth, and if they are not, there can be sanctions on that. So I suspect there'll be more hearings to find out, to make sure the lab is being properly administered now. But it's a little late. It's like trying to close the barn door after all the animals have left.
Wow, well, it's a huge story. I remember talking to you about it before, I think around a year ago, when you were put on this committee.
Right. Yeah, so it has been interesting, and it was a long process to get the security clearance and then go through it. And it read, we had to both review the documents, then make our case for why we felt parts of it, in this case most of it, should be released, but that had to go to a panel of judges. At the same time, we had government officials making their case as to why they thought the information should be held back. Fortunately, the judges 9 times out of 10 sided with us, and I think today Canadians are better informed because of it. Certainly Parliament is, and I think the release of this document is going to provide the oversight we need to make sure the lab is operating properly, to make sure our allies will, again, down the road have confidence in us, and to make sure going forward we take Chinese espionage more seriously.
And this is not the only pandemic-related thing that you're looking at right now. Also, huge headline is looking back at ArriveCAN, this $60 million app that I think anyone who lives in a border community got very used to using quite early on
Yes.
when the borders were open. Tell us a little bit about what you're looking at with.
So I chair the House of Commons Public Accounts Committee. This is a committee in Parliament that is chaired by an opposition members. It's an oversight committee. As many of your viewers, I'm sure, have heard, a few weeks ago, the Auditor General of Canada came out with a big report on ArriveCAN, an app that was supposed to cost between $80,000 and $200,000, somehow ballooned to $60 million. The Auditor General tabled her audit, and it comes to the Public Accounts Committee for review. This was a very badly run program. Not only did the budget explode, the auditor found there's no paperwork to back it up. We don't know who did what. Tens of millions of dollars were paid to consultants who then subcontracted out. The auditor can only examine government spending, so once money goes out the door to a consultant, we're not able to find out exactly who did what. Did we get value for money? In fact, the auditor has said Canadian taxpayers did not get value for money in this program. But there is a sense that fraud took place, and at the same time that public servants did not do the job that they're required to do to document decisions. For example, decisions as to why a contract is going to be sole source. That is when it doesn't go to bidders. That the government in some circumstances can say, we want this company to do it, here is why. They need to document that to show it is not favoritism, to show that it is can be justified. No documents. Just like there are no documents to show what the whole thing costs. In fact, that $60 million figure is just an estimate from the Auditor General. So I should say at least $60 million. This has the government now scurrying because these are requirements that are well known. And right now at committee, all we're hearing from senior public servants, and we're having deputy minister levels in, they're either saying, I wasn't there or I don't know, but we'll get to the bottom of it. But that's hard to believe when the Auditor General has spent the last year looking at this, going through every filing cabinet, having to go through emails to get a sense of this program. Of course, we've learned in the last week that as many as 10,000 emails might have been deleted. So there's another investigation from the Information Commissioner. There's also an investigation from the Procurement Ombudsman, who is saying rules were broken all over the place. And to top it all off, the police are looking at it as well. So it is a mess for the government. And the auditor said the pandemic did not give public servants or the government the right to throw out the rule book. Allowances were made to move faster, to use sole source contracts, but you still had to justify them. And of course, the government had to provide and retain the receipts so we knew what we were paying for. Because how an app that was supposed to cost $200,000 jumps to $60 million, I think leaves a lot of taxpayers wondering what the heck's going on in the government for that to happen.
I think that I could speak on behalf of most Canadians by saying I think that's the biggest concern is how did an app that's seemingly as simple as it is cost $60 million?
That's right.
Most people have a pretty good sense of tech costs.
Yeah.
And $60 million, what, do you have any idea of how those are being justified?
No. And in fact, one of the things that we're going to try to do is bring in the contractors. I mean, one that's been in the news a lot is this GC Strategies. This is two individuals that works out of a basement. They have no IT expertise. All they would do is they would pitch for the work, then they would subcontract it out, and they would pocket as much as 30% as their fee. So you can see where some of the money went to. It just went to line the pockets of consultants. So there are a number of vendors like that we plan to call in to find out. We got basic questions because in some cases we don't even know who initiated the contact. Was it the Government of Canada that contacted a vendor, or did the vendor contact the Government of Canada to pitch itself? This is information the auditor should have been able to report on. She couldn't. So we're hearing from, there were three departments that are involved in this. The Border Agency, which was the lead department, Health Canada, and Procurement. and they all have egg on their face, and none of them are able to explain what happened. We can't even get a sense of the name of the bureaucrat that approved the spending on ArriveCAN. The records are so shoddy. So it's a real problem, and I am concerned that people got rich at the expense of taxpayers for little, and in some cases, no work.
Well, I think all Canadians are curious to get more details on the $60 million. So I look forward to when you're back.
There'll be more, yes.
We have about a minute left, John, if you can believe it. Do you have any final thoughts? I know you're heading back to sit on committee to Ottawa right away.
So this is supposed to be what we call a recess week, where we're home in our ridings. And I just mentioned I was in Parliament on Friday when we closed it for Mr. Mulroney's following his death. I have to head back to Ottawa for Parliament for committee work on Tuesday on the ArriveCAN. We're having in witnesses on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday of this week. We want to get to the bottom of what happened. We want to get officials in, because we're finding some witnesses a bit like being home dealing with fish, very slippery. So we're getting a lot of, we're not available this week when Parliament sits, but we're available this week. Okay, well, we're coming back next week, so we'll see you then. I think in some cases they didn't think we'd be this tenacious. This is a committee that the majority of members are opposition members. So we're gonna keep asking the questions until we find out what happened to $60 million and who got rich.
Well, I appreciate you are rivaling Mayor Brad Henderson as my most frequent guest, so I appreciate so much how much time you make for us to come in and update people from this riding.
Well, look, I think it's important because Parliament, it's where so many decisions are made, and it impacts the people that vote for me or people that don't vote for me, the people I represent, and I do appreciate being able to come back, talk to you, to give an update on some of the work that I'm doing in Parliament, because even though these are both two high-profile issues, the Winnipeg Lab and the ArriveCAN, people might not have a sense of the work I'm doing behind the scenes to make sure that information gets out to Canadians and we get some answers from the government.
Well, you're a huge part of history right now, so it's exciting to follow. Thank you so much for sitting down with me today.
My pleasure, anytime.
My guest today has been the MP for New Brunswick Southwest, John Williamson. I'm Vicki Hogarth. Thank you for watching Southwest Magazine.
Southwest Magazine is a news and public affairs production of CHCO Television.